Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. We're going to be talking about novels and how they are dealing with the issue of our climate change and what is happening to our environment with my guest, Dr. Norman Westhoff. He has a doctorate in medicine and also a master's in public health. He has been an occupational medicine physician and a family physician, as well as being a medical director at the Concentra Occupational Health Centers in San Francisco and Santa Rosa, California, medical director of Occupational Health Multicare Associates in Roseville, Minnesota, and occupational medicine lead physician Group Health Incorporated in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. And he is author of the science fiction trilogy, The Erebus Tales. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Nancy.
I thoroughly enjoyed reading, actually, Book 2, The Color of Greed. I'm looking forward to Book 1, Stone Fever, Book 3, Gifts of a Dark God, because you dealt in a fascinating way with what might happen in a few hundred years?
Yes, 300 years.
When humanity has really done a lot of damage to our environment, forced migrations, has populations moving from north to south because of all sorts of crises that we have created, and how we might be able to survive in a post-industrial nomadic society. Is the purpose of your book to warn us?
No, I'm kind of glass half full sort of person. I take the view that even after we have had to face drastic and continued climate change and upheavals in our environment, that humanity can and will still survive, but at the great cost of forced migrations.
You have a vision that human species will be able to survive catastrophic climate change, but I'm wondering at what cost. You talk about the clash of cultures, of an industrial culture where people have moved from the middle part of the planet or North America up into Canada, and how the people in the southern hemisphere have moved down into Antarctica, which, as in your book, now is mostly grasslands and has a nomadic lifestyle for the people.
Correct.
So the Earth's tropical latitudes become uninhabitable in your story, but
yes,
people are inhabiting the planet, but there is this clash. I found that your characters were really fascinating. You had everybody from a geologist to a cultural anthropologist to a shaman to an industrialist. Tell us more about the various stories. And I know that even though a trilogy should be read from book 1, 2, and 3, it was quite easy to understand what was going on just by reading book 2.
Briefly, I postulate that drastic climate change makes the middle latitudes, that is from the equator even up to California, and then southward by an equal distance, makes those equatorial zones uninhabitable, not just because of heat and rising sea levels, but because of continuous tropical storms that even disrupt communications. And so people have to move either northward or southward, and then those two populations gradually become separate and are unable to communicate with each other. The people who moved southward, they had to leave technology behind them, most of the industrial technology at least, and they had to rely on cottage industries to sustain themselves and become nomads like our ancestors were until the Industrial Revolution and agriculture kind of came along. Meanwhile, the people that moved northward were able to still retain and advance technology, so they're moving right along, but these two cultures are separated until this geologist, who's a specialist in the rare metal iridium, and that becomes more precious as you read the book, there becomes much sought after. So she has reason to believe that there are plentiful stores of iridium near this volcano in Antarctica, named Mount Erebus. That part is true, that iridium is found near volcanoes, but many of the other volcanoes are not reachable in this post-climate changed world. So they send us airship with a crew of 4 people, including the geologist, to Antarctica to find the stores of iridium near this volcano, and lo and behold, they stumble upon people from this nomadic culture, and that sets the plot in motion.
Modern technology uses so many different elements, and the rare earth elements are important to us, but difficult to obtain. Why did you choose to use iridium in your stories?
Oh, that's a good question. You know what? I was a member of a book club when we lived in San Francisco. This probably be about 15 years ago when I started conceiving the first book. And it was a chemistry major in college. I can't remember what was the first candidate rare earth metal that I postulated. But one of the other book club members, who was an engineer, I believe, but he suggested iridium could serve as a shield, so to speak, to coat the hull of a airship or spaceship, if you will, that's trying to cross these very hazardous middle latitudes with all these chemical soup in the air. That's part of it, along with the hurricanes and so forth. So I said, I read up more about iridium and says, that would be a good one. And especially that it is found near volcanoes, because it is relatively plentiful in volcanic eruptions. So you'll find it around the base of volcanoes.
The plot is fascinating because you deal with issues of relationships, of different cultures clashing, different drives among the people, how to protect themselves, how to work together. We know that scientists believe that there is a landmass under the West Antarctic ice sheet, and that it's mostly islands, including this real Erebus. Where did you get that name from? Why did you choose that volcano?
Because it's there. Erebus is a real volcano in Antarctica. If you look closely on the map, it's on an island, and once the ice melts, even if the rest of Antarctica becomes inhabitable, it wouldn't figure in the plot here because it's on an island. But what the heck? The novelist gets a certain amount of license to create the story, so I thought that would be a neat place to start it.
But isn't that name from ancient Greek mythology?
It is. Erebus refers to the primordial god of darkness.
You also talk in your book about how these tribes gather for their midsummer rendezvous at Lake Tal. Is that a real place?
Well, it is, although you couldn't, even if you were in Antarctica now, you wouldn't find it because it's buried under about a mile of ice in the East Antarctic ice sheet. But by some type of sonar or other measuring devices, scientists have identified a mass underneath this ice sheet that, when the ice melts, would reveal a lake. I thought it would be a neat place to, the rendezvous concept is where all the different tribes around the continent gather together each summer, where these nomadic cultures have a gathering point.
You mentioned the rare earth element iridium. What are we using that for now, here, in the present?
Well, it does have applications in that it is very heat resistant, so that I postulate it can be used for coating an airship. If someone in this story, for instance, if someone were to design an airship to get through these tropical storms and weather the severe atmospheric conditions trying to get through these tropical storms, that would be the substance to protect the structure of the plane.
You yourself have visited 6 of the 7 continents, but you place your story on a continent that you haven't been to.
That's true. The closest I've been is right across from Tierra del Fuego.
I've been through the straits there, and it's cold and windy.
Oh, yes. I visited Patagonia about 10 years ago. It's a beautiful landscape and just kind of gave me a taste of what Antarctica might be like if the climate changed.
I find it fascinating that you have basically been a medical doctor your entire life, from 1976 until you retired in 2019, and then you've decided to focus on writing this novel, this trilogy.
Yes and no. I actually started writing the first book without knowing a darn thing about fiction, or about writing fiction. The idea came to me in 2007, and it took 9 years really to get it in good enough shape that it has some peer review, in other words, from consultants and from writing coaches and so forth, that they felt it was good enough to publish. The second book took about 2 years, and the third one took another 2 years.
I just loved the dialogue, the description, the conflicts. It was enjoyable reading, and at the same time distressing to hear people fighting and hear people clashing in terms of who wants what and what's going to happen. As in plays, as in films and novels, I don't like to tell the whole story because we want people to read it, but how would you summarize the story in book 1, Stone Fever? I read The Color of Greed, which is book 2, and the third book, Gifts of a Dark God, all part of your trilogy, the Erebus tales.
Right. Well, book 1, that is Stone Fever, was written more as an adventure story and really ideal for teen readers, early 20s, because the 3 of the main characters, the 2 of them are teens, and the geologist protagonist is in her early 20s, but it all takes place within about 9 days, so there's lots of movement and action. The second book takes place over a period of about 3 months. It pulls back a little bit, so you see some of the scenes take place in the Northern Hemisphere, in Canada and Europe, which is where these other parties who sponsor the search for iridium, where the big corporations are, and where the people who are in favor of iridium exploration. And without giving anything away, I'll just say that they have some ulterior motives for exploring in Antarctica, which may pose a threat to the indigenous peoples who have settled there, that these nomadic tribes. The third book steps back even further and takes place over 2 years. And what I tried to do there, by now we have 5 characters who are all point of view characters, and each of them has their own narrative arc, so to speak. So it traces all those things through and then interweaves them among the other main characters.
If people want to find out more about your books, they go to your website. I think you need to spell Erebus.
Yes. So it's www.erebustales.com.
I enjoyed the story. It really felt like a movie that one was reading. You had an implicit message in all of this. That's if individuals are not motivated to reduce their carbon footprint on an altruistic basis, the climate crisis will eventually force most societies to do so?
Yes, certainly all of the carbon footprint and all of the fossil fuels we're burning are having a huge impact on the climate. But even if we were all nomads, let's say, even if we were all forced to scale back drastically on the technology that we have become so dependent on, the fossil fuel industry and so forth, our planet is going through, or would be still going through, some serious climate change, and that's just part of geologic history. So we're just in that phase. We're just accelerating the process with human activity.
I enjoyed reading what might occur if we don't take action to solve the climate crisis. Thank you so very much for writing these wonderful stories. As a physician, you tackled the climate change problem with environments, cultures, societies, how they dealt with it. Do you think that there's a trilogy in the works regarding all the viruses that we are having to tackle with during the pandemics?
You know, the viruses, my MPH, by the way, it had to do with international epidemiology. I had to take epidemiology as part of the master's program. I think most epidemiologists would tell you that all the new viral diseases that we're being exposed to quite a bit before COVID, like avian flu and SARS, and remember all those acronyms from 20 years ago. And it really has to do with how small the world has become. In other words, how easy it is for people to travel from one country to another, at least it was before COVID came along. When they do that, they bring with them whatever they've been exposed to. So as long as we're still continuing to interact globally on the scale that we have been, yes, there will be novel viruses show up. Epidemiologists talk about preparedness, and that's important, but each one of these viruses has its own challenges of how to best deal with it.
Thank you for being my guest.
And thanks for having me, Nancy.
I have been speaking with Norman Westhoff, a former occupational medicine physician and family physician and medical director of many institutions and author of the Erebus Tales. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.